Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eiderstein, and thank you for joining me as we embark on a new leg of our journey together on this podcast and start a new book. I'm very excited about it, and I'm glad to be back in the saddle after a couple of weeks off. I appreciate your patience and your understanding. I am in a master's program, and it's proven to be a little bit more rigorous than I was expecting, so getting back to this was a priority, but I had to sort out how the next year or so was going to go. So, thank you for your time, your understanding, and I'm very excited to get started today. We are going to get started on a new book. I've been introduced at the end of the last video, and it is called Focus. I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. Fantastic book. I've read it. And there's so much to say about it, but we'll get to that, I'm sure, progressively as we go through this whole thing. And this book has a lot to do with the writing of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It talks about what is the group? Oxford group, excuse me. And its importance in this man's life. And that group was obviously where 12-Step was born from at the end of the day. Pretty interesting stuff. A lot of the people like Bill W. and Dr. Baum for Alcoholics Anonymous started in the Oxford group and using that as their support group. And then they formed Alcoholics Anonymous outside of the Oxford group, and partially because the Oxford group got sick of them. Got sick of helping drunks, especially the ones that didn't want help. And there's a lot more versions of that story, to be fair. I know it, but generally that's kind of what happened. And that's why this book is so important. It has a lot of great information in it, so I'm glad to be introducing this one. How this is going to go is it's similar to how I did As a Man Thinketh. I'll be reading a chapter in one video, and then I will be doing a review of the chapter in the next video. I'm hoping to get it down to doing the chapter reading around Wednesday, Thursday time frame, and then the review over the weekend. So you get 2 videos from me a week on this one. And I think there's 18 chapters, so you might see a lot of me upcoming. This first one is not going to go like that. We're going to go get back into this at a slower pace. I'm going to do the chapter reading today, and then everything past that, and then next weekend I will do the reading or the review of chapter 1. Also, I do want to say going forward, I won't do such a long introduction of this book. I will get right to reading the chapter with minimal introduction to it. So if people want to read or listen to the book, they can pretty much just put it on the playlist on, and just go forward from there with a little interruption be chapter to chapter. So I'm excited about it. Just for those who want to buy the book, this is printed in 1934 when the book was originally printed. So a fantastic book, but it's reprinted under this title called Believing in False Gods. I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. Now, this is a facsimile print, which means that these are just pictures of the pages primarily. So let me just show you an example. So if you buy it, you will have the same page numbers I do. Here's the page number. I was a pagan, business of the supernatural. I had put God first in theory. Here it is in this book as well. I was a pagan, the business the business of supernatural. I had put God first in theory. So this facsimile print is an exact copy of the original, right? So the page numbers all look the same. You'll be getting the same language, verbiage, everything, presentation even. So I'll probably alternate back and forth between which book I'm reading out of because they are the same, depending on what I feel like that day. But today, to get us started, I will be reading out of the original, and I'm very excited about it. So I think there's a little piece in the beginning I wanted to read to you. All right. Title page, I was a pagan. We're going to go through this whole book. I know we did only part of Sermon on the Mount, and As a Man Thinketh really was a short book to go through. This is a lengthier book, but we will be going through the whole thing. Title page again, I was a pagan. And then to the Oxford group. That disciplined army of life changers who gave new meaning to my life and new direction to its purpose. Table of contents. We've got 18 chapters, 259 pages. So it's a little bit lengthier. You're going to be having to hear my voice a little bit more. Hopefully that's okay with you. So here we go. This is chapter 1. The business of chasing false gods. Paganism. At 20, life looked like a high adventure, intriguing and indecorous. At 30, it looked like a high endeavor, socially and economically important. By 40, however, I grew highly dubious. Life seemed to have lost flavor on both accounts. It was then I met the Oxford group. At this time, I think I would have described myself as white, married, and a Christian. Actually, I was somewhat tarnished and discolored, married in name only, and very much of a pagan. A pagan is a man who spends his time chasing false gods. And I had spent 40 years of my time in chasing pleasure, possessions, power, position, and applause. I now call these pagan goals my unfortunate 5 Ps. One or more of them seems to have played a part in my life for as long as I am able to remember. My first ambition, for example, was to be the captain of a tugboat. This, I believed, would enable me to cruise around the harbor much as my fancy pleased me, and it would not bring only pleasure, but applause from all my friends. Being a New Yorker, the tugboat idol formulated in a Hudson River ferry, which noble craft, in turn, gave birth to my next ambition, tending the ferry boat engines. I thought must be rather an heroic and exciting job, and I decided to become an engineer. However, I passed examinations for an engineering institute I do not know. Once there, however, I discovered that engineering was less a matter of heroics than of mathematics, for which I happened to possess a singular distaste. Long hours over a drafting board were equally tedious. A draught of beer was much more to my liking. So that, when Christmas vacation came around, I found myself 58 hours behind in mechanical drawing. From then on, I became more intimate with barkeepers than with my professors, and was cheerfully plowed in 7 subjects out of a possible 8. After several months futilely spent at a business college, my father grew impatient and faced me with the question of what I really wanted to do in life. I thought it all over, trying to be honest, and decided that I really wanted to write. My next misadventure was to attend a leading school of journalism, then in its first year. They offered a most liberal education covering a wide range of subjects on the theory, I believe, that a newspaper man should know a little bit of everything. This scattering of knowledge left me mentally a mass of loose ends. There was no course in college to weave these strands together in a new and connected philosophy of life. I came to the conclusion then that life was going to be nothing but a jolly struggle for existence, a survival of the fittest, and devil take the hindmost. Very well, I thought. If life is going to be a struggle, I will show them how to struggle. I will land on top of a pile of money, with a bigger and better home than my neighbors, with membership in more exclusive golf clubs and ownership of more resplendent automobiles, possessions thus hooked up with pleasure, applause, power, and position, and became one of my 5 pagan gods. To clinch my decision, the editor of the New York dailies came up and made the student journalists a speech. "Boys," he said, "if I had to do it again, I would go into the business end of a newspaper. Outside of Arthur Brisbane, who makes more money than the President of the United States, we of the editorial staff are lucky to draw 5,000 or 6,000 a year." To my recently acquired eyes of avarice, these meager figures held no lure. I let go of my former aim for a position in the literary world and sought a position in an advertising agency. That was 20 years ago. I have been an advertising agent ever since. I've spent many weary hours writing what people paid me to write instead of what I thought or what I wanted to say. I hope I may be forgiven for some of the things that I wrote. For the girls I led to believe that a lost lover could be recaptured through a drop of judiciously placed perfume. For the bad bargains I pressed on unsuspecting people as goodbyes. For forcing on the public countless non-essential articles that have helped to swamp their lives, and for other forms of shoddy thinking and shabby writing, which I considered just part of the game. At the time, however, I regarded all of this as high adventure, as part of life's exciting contest to outwit the other fellow and come out on top of the heap. I came out on top fast enough. In fact, a little bit too fast for my own good. I had held my first job for scarcely 2 weeks when the boss offered me a contract with a rising scale of salary which turned old-timers in the office green with envy. That rather turned my head. I was showing them how to struggle from the very first gun, and I too soon, had all the possessions any single man would want. This early rise in fortune turned me early to possession of a wife. A wife, I felt, should prove a great convenience around the house. I had been much annoyed by the fact that my family went away for the summer. Having become a working man, I could no longer accompany them and found it most irritating in their absence to run out of soap. I also wanted to be able to throw wide-open cocktail parties in my own home instead of having to sneak out for a drink. At one and the same time, I was tired of seeing too much of women I could not respect and not enough of girls I really liked. Besides, for the 6th or 7th time in my philandering existence, I had fell seriously in love. Marriage thus became a new adventure to me, and an adventure in devising and demanding comforts that I had not found in the midst of a somewhat straight-laced and old-fashioned family. An adventure in the freedom of doing what I jolly well pleased behind the doors of my own home. Drinking also seemed like an adventure at the time. Playing the drums, or leading the orchestra at a nightclub, delivering a drunken lecture on temperance from the bar of a saloon, arguing that with the doorman who didn't want you to carry off the box trees from in front of his establishment, waking up the neighbors as you came home with the milkman. These somehow seemed to make up for the slightly flat flavor I was beginning to find in the adventure of business and the growing lack of zest I experienced in the new adventure of the home. Where once, however, alcohol appeared to make lights brighter, music sweeter, colors fairer, women more beautiful, and men more companionable, I began to find that I had to drink not simply to heighten the pleasure of lights and music and the companionship of men and women, but in order to stand for them at all. I began to get my first suspicions that something must be out of gear in the commonly accepted scheme of things. A friend of mine recalls that when he and his family stood up in church and sang "Like a Mighty Army Moves the Church of God," he, even as a child, could see that there was something wrong with that picture. And I, even as a tyro among businessmen, Benedicts and drunks, began to feel there might be something wrong with the plunging along year after year simply to pile up as many possessions as possible, to possess a wife of whom I was growing steadily more neglectful, and to possess a thirst which gradually was ripening into insatiability. Was there going to be nothing to look forward to except, perhaps, the making of still more money? The acquisition of other wives? Perhaps other fellows? Why worry? The whole engulfed in the drinking of still more liquor. I begin to feel, in short, that the pagan aims and purposes did not and could not represent complete success in life. I tried to figure out that really to succeed in life, a man should succeed not only in business, not only in marriage, but not only in holding his liquor, but in doing something with himself. He should, let us say, develop a character. I felt that my character possessed many negative attributes, such as fear, anger, revenge, and pride, and that it also held many positive potentialities, such as poise, good nature, sympathy, and understanding. I tried to make a chart of these things, showing which qualities fell on the positive side and which on the negative. This was accompanied by a scoring system, through which one could measure progress in developing the positive side of a personality. As an old tutor of mine once said, however, my boy, never write anything till after you are 40. You won't know what life is all about until then. He was right. I soon gave up my effort and turned to see if, in actual practice, there was not something more worthwhile I could do with my business, my home, and my drinking. I began, for instance, to look upon the advertising business, not just in its selfish aspects, as a jolly racket through which one could make a rather large amount of money rather easily, but its social aspects, as a necessary link in the mighty chain of American merchandising. The industrial machine tool, I could see, had multiplied the efforts of the individual worker and given rise to mass production. Advertising, I declared, was the machine tool necessary to multiply the efforts of the modern salesman and enable him to move this mass of goods through the modern channels of distribution. It did not occur to me, however, just why it was necessary either to make or to move this mass of goods, or what, if anything, that did for human beings. I took a look upon the home not simply as a comfortable liberty hall for a man's convenience and pleasure, but as an institution, a bulwark in the eddies of a free-thinking society. I began to think it a duty that we, of the better and more intelligent classes, should bear a greater number of children to offset the influx of the uneducated immigrants. It did not occur to me that a self-centered snob might prove no safer for the future of civilization than in my particular brand of society than a self-centered communist. Even drinking, I began to socialize, idealize, and ennoble. Life, I argued, is unnaturally strained at best. Like an overtrained football team, we go stale and sticking to the same old round and we become emotionally repressed and nervously overstimulated. To relieve this strain, we need to go on a good party, dance on some restaurant table, or kick a policeman who isn't looking. I elevated my periodic debauches to the status of a social safety valve and more. The approach to a man's inner and finer thoughts, I declared, comes only with the breaking through of his reserve, and 5 or 6 slugs of whiskey are necessary to release his flow of soul. I represented alcohol, in other words, as necessary, not only to the stability of society, but to its uplift. So not only to the stability of society, but to its uplift. Unless one is a hopeless moron, however, one cannot live long under a pretense like this. One cannot go on indefinitely gilding the cabbages of life and pretending that they are lilies. Another 10 years or so, and I was ready to admit that the home was nothing but an overstuffed barracks representing a great waste and duplication of effort in its support, pandering to a man's pride and little else, and enslaving him all day in the struggle for money, so that he might sleep there at night and paint it at least as often as his next-door neighbor. Then, too, despite my early rise in business, I also went through early losses, and the business prospect soon dwindled into certainty. that I was not going to be able to accumulate a fortune enabling me to retire within 20 years. As for the social and economic value of the advertising profession, I could see that it had degenerated into nothing but an effort to stretch markets and to stretch them again and again in an utterly selfish, utterly childish, and utterly hopeless belief that we could make and keep them big enough to soak up all the junk our manufacturers wanted to pour into them. My work, in other words, lost all color as a gay and exciting adventure in the romantic struggle of life. It was stripped of all the false pretense as a valuable and necessary instrument of modern distribution. It became rather an unpleasant means of keeping myself in golf clubs and cars, and an occupation in which I might escape from other thoughts and obligations. Religion had been called an escape, so has alcohol. But make no mistake, they are nothing as compared with work. Work, especially in those countless needless hours, is the great universal escape from thought and from facing the reality of living. Drink, too, of course, is an escape from work or lack of it, and I finally was ready to admit it. My home, in other words, became something to escape from. My office became something to escape into. My alcohol became the alley of my escape I chose when both home and office got so unspeakably upon my nerves that I turned to cocktails and knockout drops in order to forget the whole sorry business. I had reached that crisis in life when we question the value of all human effort. John Stuart Mill once said, "Suppose all your objects in life were realized, that all the changes in institutions and opinions which you are looking forward to could be completely effected at this very instant. Would this be a great joy and happiness to you?" With John Stuart Mill, I had to answer no. As far as my selfish interests were concerned, all of the pleasures, possessions, powers, positions, and applause I ever achieved had turned to dust in my fingers. Looking into the lives of other self-ruined successes, men who had pushed along these avenues much farther than I had, I could still see nothing to want. Gilding these efforts and achievements with the pretext that I was reviving American industry, holding the American home, or drinking to withstand the onslaughts of American freedom added nothing to my satisfaction. And, if the truth must be known, it added nothing to the satisfaction of the other fellow. In the modern world, in short, I had found and could find no sign whatever of a satisfying answer to the question, is this all there is to living? And I found no greater satisfaction in the social, political, or economic ideas and ideals of modern thinkers. In an impressive symposium entitled Living Philosophies, for example, Theodore Dreiser wrote, "I catch no meaning at all from all I have seen, and I pass quite as I came, confused and dismayed." James Truslow Adams admitted that he was floundering in a dismal swamp. Albert Einstein was certain that man is here for the sake of other men. And in a book of his own, so keen an analyst as Walter Lippmann could offer no better prescription than the advice of Confucius, to follow what the heart desires without transgressing what is right. This inability to see what we were living for, this lack of knowledge and confusion on the part of individuals, was clearly reflected in the confusion of the larger world. I looked not only into my own life and into the lives of other men, but into life as a whole, and saw that many lives, as blind and selfish as my own, had fused to make up a self-ruined world. It was a world inflexible in the face of fact. Parents in that world were wondering what lay ahead for their children. Children, as they looked at the fruitless and befuddled lives of their parents, wondered what lay ahead for themselves. Husbands and wives, poisoned by the live-your-own-life theory and an exaggerated sense of self, were drawing ever more sharply apart, and it seemed that almost as if every other married couple that we knew were either in the throes or on the verge of a divorce. Business relationships were based on the principle not of earning one's daily bread, but of snatching as much bread as possible out of the mouth of some other fellow. And it was a shocking mess that businessmen had made of business. Newspaper editors, politicians, reformers, and troublemakers of all types hurled into the confusion 10,000 crack-pated schemes to make it worse. We were led every way by the destructive cross currents of idealism, and men torn by internal conflict to the point of hair-trigger temper took vindictive potshots at almost everything in sight. All of this, I felt, was because so many self-made men actually self-ruined, like myself, had spent their lives, as I had, in chasing false gods. And when, in 1929, the stock market went down and all 5 of my false gods rose up and deserted in one body, I determined to seek the real meaning and purpose of life before I again took up the business of living. If my old aims of pleasure, possessions, power, position, and applause could be won and permanently held by no man, if all these supposed friends could so easily be put to rout by a mere business panic, if all desire for these aims ended with their fulfillment and they became no longer desirable, if their pursuit by hundreds of other men for hundreds of years had resulted only in chaos come again, what gods of a more faithful nature and enduring value could one live for? What are we here for? Where do we go from here? I determined to answer these perplexing questions once and for all, and I sat down to think it through and write a book. And that's it. That was chapter 1 of I Was a Pagan, the business of chasing false gods. Paganism is the subtitle of that chapter. To anyone in recovery, to anyone that's had any experience on a spiritual journey, to anyone that has chased those 5 P's, the power, pleasure, position, what was the applause, and what's that last one? Possessions. Of course, possessions. To anyone that's chased those as enthusiastically as I have, or as VC Kitchen has, let me tell you, you can relate. I know I can. So that's all for this week. Thank you all so much for joining. I will be back again next week to do a review of the chapter, try to put a little something together about that. There's a ton of information, a lot of stuff I relate to, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff y'all relate to as well. I hope you find this book as enlightening as I do. So I'm looking forward to it. So until next time, thanks.